Hi there, it's Clyde. If you've stumbled upon this recording in the middle of a restless night or during one of those odd quiet moments where the world feels fuzzy and far away, welcome. I'm what you might call a sleepy time traveler. I don't really set out to do anything heroic or even useful, really. There's no grand mission, no dramatic clashes with destiny. I just end up in places. Different times, different lands, usually drawn by the smallest things. A patch of sunlight, a familiar smell, the texture of old stone or the sound of rustling pages. And sometimes, when I blink a little too slowly and drift off, I wake up somewhere else. Somewhere historic. But not the loud kind of historic. The quiet kind. The kind where no one's really doing much. Like the smell of bread in the air long before it's baked. Or someone humming to themselves in the background while nothing happens in particular. This time, I landed in Paris, the year 1789. Yes, that part of history, the French Revolution. But don't worry, there's no guillotines here, no storming of Bastilles or dramatic speeches, just a very long line for bread, and me waiting in it. Before we drift into all that, take a second to do a couple things, so you don't have to think about them later when you're all cozy and half asleep. Go ahead and tap like, and if you haven't yet, click subscribe. That way these stories will always be here when you need them. And if this isn't your first time, or if you think you might like more of these strange, sleepy journeys, I've got a whole playlist just for Clyde's sleepy time stories. It's there waiting for you, like a warm bed at the end of a long day. Now then, let's shuffle to the back of the line. I had meant to go somewhere else entirely. Honestly, I thought I was aiming for a quiet orchard in the English countryside, maybe the early 1900s. I'd heard someone mention an apple harvest, and it stuck in my mind. But my travel stone, the one I always seem to find again after every journey, had other plans. One blink, one breath, and I was standing on a cobblestone street in Paris. The air was cool, the kind of morning air that clings to stone and carries the scent of smoke and flour. That's what caught me first. Not the sound or the sights, but the smell of fresh bread. Or maybe bread about to be fresh. That just beginning smell, like someone had opened a window too early in the morning and let the kitchen out. It was early, I think. The sun hadn't fully committed yet, sort of slouching against the rooftops and sneaking between narrow alleys. The light painted everything in soft gold and quiet gray. There were already people about, but not many. Just a slow trickle of shapes wrapped in shawls and wool, all heading in the same direction, so naturally. I followed. They weren't talking much, just the soft cadence of shoes on cobblestone, the occasional cough, the rustle of wicker baskets. I shuffled in step, not in any hurry. No one else seemed to be either, which was odd, considering where I was. I heard someone murmur the word boulangerie, and that was that. My feet knew where to go. We reached the line eventually. A ribbon of people coiled down the block, around a corner and possibly beyond. The end was nebulous. Maybe it kept going. Maybe it wrapped back around on itself. No one seemed to mind. I took my place behind a woman in a bonnet who was humming a melody I didn't recognize. She didn't look at me, just acknowledged my presence with the barest tilt of her head. A kind of silent nod that said, "Yes, another one waiting." That's fine. I didn't ask what we were waiting for. I didn't need to. It was bread. It was always bread. The line didn't move much. It didn't need to. There was something comforting about how everyone seemed to accept the pace. A shared understanding. Nobody fidgeted. No one glanced nervously at the time. There was no time here, really. Just the light shifting across the rooftops and the occasional flutter of a pigeon taking off too early from a windowsill. I tucked my hands into my coat. It wasn't cold exactly, just brisk. the sort of temperature that makes you aware of your elbows for no particular reason. The woman in front of me, she had a blue ribbon woven through her bonnet, shifted her weight a little, but didn't speak. Somewhere up ahead, a man cleared his throat in that grand, French sort of way, like he was about to say something profound, but then thought better of it. I listened to the city around me. Paris always has a kind of sigh to it, no matter the year. You can hear it in the way the shutters creak open or in the tiny footsteps of a cat trotting across a ledge. A few carts rattled by, their wooden wheels giving that hollow clunk against the stones. Someone wheeled a barrel of something past, onions or maybe apples. The smell was faint but comforting. Across the street, a boy leaned against a doorway, his arms folded, watching the line. Not with judgment, just with the long patience of someone who has nowhere else to be. His boots were scuffed, and he had that certain shrug about him that said he didn't expect anything exciting to happen today. I liked that. The bakery wasn't even in sight yet. That was the beautiful part. No one could even smell the bread anymore, not really. We were all just following a collective memory of it, the idea of bread, a shared wish. I found myself wondering about the people around me, what they did with their days, what they thought about when they weren't standing in line for food. Were they weavers, menders, letter writers? Did they have secrets? Probably not the exciting kind. Probably the small, quiet sort that never make it into the history books. Someone hiding a chipped plate. Someone pretending not to have lost a button. A man who claims he trimmed his own beard but really paid his neighbor 2 sous to do it. I liked imagining those sorts of things. It passed the time. A breeze moved through the street like it was late for something. It tugged at coats and lifted a few leaves into a lazy tumble. One of them skittered against my boot and then went off to bother someone else further up the line. I watched it go and felt oddly proud of it for having some place to be. Time didn't seem to matter. The line didn't matter. I could have been anywhere. But I was here. And I liked being here. The stones underfoot were worn and uneven, the kind that try to trip you up if you're not paying attention. I shifted from foot to foot and tried not to let my heels get too used to the same spot. The man behind me sighed. Not in a frustrated way, just in a here we are again sort of way. I glanced back and smiled politely. He had a mustache that curled like the end of a violin bow. He nodded, then looked forward again. Somewhere a bell rang. Probably for something entirely unrelated to bread. But it made a few people lift their heads for a moment, then go back to looking at nothing in particular. A girl up ahead pulled out a crust of something from her pocket and gnawed it slowly, eyes on the ground like it might do a trick if she stared long enough. I thought, maybe I should have brought something too. But then, I didn't exactly plan this. You don't pack a snack for time travel. Not usually. The line moved half a step. That was exciting. People adjusted their feet. It was like watching a flock of birds shift direction slightly, just a fraction, but together. A few murmured greetings were exchanged. One man reached into his coat and pulled out a pipe, but didn't light it. Just held it in his hand, as if it made the waiting easier. The street had a slight lean to it, sloping down and to the left, like it had gotten tired halfway through being built. The gutters were filled with yesterday's dust and the faint memory of rain. Someone had carved their initials into a stone near my foot, CR+LM, and the plus sign had a little heart worked into it. Probably long since forgotten by whoever had made it, but still there. Still trying. I don't know how long I stood there. An hour, maybe. Or 10 minutes, or the better part of a morning. The city didn't mind. The pigeons came and went. A few more carts passed. A small dog wandered up, sniffed someone's boot, and then wandered off again without a bark or a sound. Like he was on patrol. At some point I realized my back had started to relax. The quiet shuffling, the steady presence of others, the lack of urgency, it was working on me. like moss growing over a statue, slow and soft and inevitable. That was when I noticed the old man further up the line. He was sitting on a stool he must have brought with him because no one else had one. His coat was far too large, and the sleeves hung like empty flags when he moved. He was reading a folded piece of paper, slowly, squinting at each word like it might run away. I watched him for a while. He never turned the page, just stayed with it, like it was enough. Sometimes that's all we really need. One page, one step in line, one quiet morning with nothing to do but exist. Eventually, the sun made a stronger effort to join us. It leaned a little harder against the rooftops, warmed the backs of necks, and started to wake up the smells tucked into the city walls. Dust warmed up. Breadcrumbs in the cracks of the pavement whispered back to life. Someone far off started to whistle a tune, off-key but not unpleasant. A song only half remembered, probably one that had been passed around in taverns and kitchens for years. It reached us in soft echoes like it didn't mean to intrude. The woman in front of me adjusted the ribbon in her bonnet, as if that might make the line move faster. It didn't. A few more steps forward, maybe, but mostly the same. I glanced at the windows above, where flower boxes sagged a little under the weight of the season. Some shutters had been painted recently, others peeled like old wallpaper. One had a cat perched in the sun, blinking slowly at the world like it didn't particularly care what century it was. I shifted my weight again. I'd long since stopped checking how far we had to go. That wasn't the point anymore. It was just standing, breathing, letting the noise of other people settle around me like a gentle fog. There's something reassuring about being surrounded by quiet purpose. Nobody rushing, nobody complaining, just a collective agreement to stand and wait. A young couple ahead of me whispered to one another, not secretively, just softly. I didn't understand every word. My French was only conversational at best, but the tone was clear. They weren't talking about the revolution. They weren't discussing liberty or equality. They were talking about a dog they'd seen the night before, one with floppy ears and a crooked tail. They disagreed about its color. I liked that. Further down the street, an old woman with a basket full of lavender walked by. She wasn't in the line, just passing through. Her basket swayed gently, and the scent followed after her like a polite ghost. I closed my eyes for a moment and let it settle in my lungs. For a second, I thought I might fall asleep standing there. It wouldn't have surprised anyone if I had. I wondered if people would notice, or if they'd just shuffle around me, the way a river moves around a stone. A cart creaked slowly into view, pulled by a very tired-looking horse. The driver wasn't in a hurry, and neither was the horse. They stopped just long enough for a boy to run out from a doorway and hand the driver a rolled-up piece of paper. He tucked it into his coat, nodded once, and carried on without a word. Whatever message had been exchanged didn't need explanation. That seemed to be the way things worked here. The clouds shifted a little overhead. Not much, just a soft folding like someone rearranging blankets in the sky. The light changed again, a little warmer now. It caught the edge of a window and turned it into gold for a heartbeat. Then it was gone. There was a little girl across the street, crouching down and drawing something in the dirt with a stick. She was completely absorbed in it. Occasionally she'd frown, wipe part of it away, and start over. I couldn't see what she was drawing. Maybe a house, maybe a chicken, maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was doing it. Not because someone told her to, but because she could. That's something I always notice when I travel. The little acts of defiance that don't look like defiance at all. Drawing in the dirt, waiting patiently in line. Smiling when there's no reason to. That's the good stuff. Someone behind me sneezed. 3 people said, "Bless you," at the same time. Different languages. same meaning. The man with the violin bow mustache sniffled once and went back to staring at the back of my head. The scent of bread reached us again, faint like it had taken the long way around. It caused a ripple through the line, the way a distant bell toll might. No one said anything, but everyone stood a little straighter. Eyes brightened slightly. The idea that the line was, in fact, leading somewhere began to feel real again. It wasn't just a performance. There would be bread. Eventually. Someone up ahead laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh. More like a hiccup of joy. It didn't spread, but it didn't vanish either. It hung there for a moment and then drifted off into the morning air. I started counting the stones in the wall beside me. Not for any particular reason, just to do it. Some were smooth, some chipped. Some looked like they'd been patched long ago by someone with more good intentions than skill. I lost count twice. Started over. Didn't mind. A rooster crowed in the distance, long past the time for it to be meaningful. The line shifted again, maybe 2 steps this time. People moved without being told. No one cut in. No one jostled. It was like a slow dance, choreographed by centuries of mornings just like this one. I breathed in and out. I looked at my hands. I thought about where I might go next. Or not go. Maybe I'd just stay here for a while longer. Not for the bread. Just for the moment. It was a good one. Quiet. Gentle. Full of stories no one would write down. And really, what more could I ask for? Somewhere along the line, a man began softly tuning a violin. I hadn't noticed him before. He was just ahead of the couple talking about the crooked-tailed dog. He didn't play, not yet. Just tightened the pegs and gently plucked at the strings. A test, a whisper, a reminder that even in waiting, there could be music. He didn't seem in a rush to do anything with it. He held it like someone might hold a sleeping bird. I watched his fingers move, slow and practiced, then return to stillness. The instrument stayed tucked under his chin, quiet as a folded handkerchief. He closed his eyes and rocked slightly on his heels. Maybe he was composing something in his mind, or maybe he was just letting the world tune itself around him. A gentle breeze tugged at my coat. This time it smelled of chimney smoke and something sweet, maybe roasted nuts or the memory of them. I could hear a woman far down the alley talking to a child, something about pigeons, or spoons, or both. Her voice was kind, the kind of voice that doesn't rise, just drifts. The cobblestones had warmed a bit underfoot, and now the soles of my shoes felt every crack, every little shift in the stone. It was oddly grounding, like the city wanted me to know it was very old and very patient. It had seen longer lines. It had waited through worse. Someone dropped a coin. It rolled in a little circle, then landed near my foot. I bent down and picked it up. An old sou, rubbed nearly smooth. The man in the coat behind me gave me a nod and took it back with a soft, grateful smile. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. There's a language in small gestures that's older than words. I leaned back slightly and looked up. The sky had shifted to a pale wash of blue now, barely any clouds left. Just a haze where the sun was trying to push its way through. Laundry fluttered gently from a balcony above, white linen catching the light like sails at rest. I wondered who lived there, if they were watching us from behind the shutters, if they'd already had their bread. A small boy darted between 2 people in line, carrying a bucket almost bigger than he was. No one scolded him. He was part of the street, part of the rhythm. He hummed something as he passed, completely off tune and perfect. A moment later, a door clattered shut behind him, and the world returned to its slow shuffle. And we waited. The violinist played a note. Just one. drawn slowly from string to air like honey from a spoon. It hung there for a while. People didn't clap, didn't turn. But the line felt different after that. Like we'd all heard the same thing, even if we pretended not to. I closed my eyes for a second and let my shoulders drop. There was a calmness in the waiting, a kind of surrender. You couldn't make the line move faster. You couldn't control the bread. All you could do was stand, breathe, and notice things. The little things. I started counting chimney pots. Then I counted scarves. Then the birds perched on the eaves. It didn't matter what I was counting. Just the counting itself was soothing. A rhythm to occupy the mind while the body stood still. Behind me, someone began softly humming along with the violin. Not the melody, really. Just a harmony that didn't quite match and didn't need to. It was like everyone was part of a slow, invisible orchestra that no one had planned. I felt someone brush past my elbow gently, a girl with a basket of small, pale radishes. She moved carefully, with a quiet confidence, offering a few to the people in line. I shook my head politely but smiled. She nodded and kept moving. A woman ahead of me took one, turned it slowly in her fingers like a tiny moon, and tucked it away without a word. And we waited. By now I was certain we hadn't moved more than 10 paces since I'd arrived. But the sun was higher. The street had filled in with life. Not noise. Life. Layers of ordinary moments folding over one another. A boy sweeping a step. A dog scratching its air. A man resting his head against a doorway with his eyes closed, not quite asleep. I liked watching people not do things. Not rush. Not talk too much. Just be. At one point, I looked down and realized my hand was resting in my coat pocket, loosely curled around the edge of the travel stone. I hadn't meant to reach for it, but I often do that when I'm content. When I don't want to leave, it was still warm. Or maybe that was just me. I let it be. I wasn't going anywhere yet. Because here, in this forgotten side street in the middle of revolutionary Paris, with the smell of imaginary bread and a violin playing to no one in particular, it felt like the world had paused just long enough to breathe. And I was breathing with it. A little while later, the woman in the bonnet ahead of me spoke. Not to me directly, more to the air in front of her, or maybe to the street. Her voice was low and smooth, the kind that's been softened by habit and repetition. She said something about how the baker's daughter had a new baby, and how the child had come early, and how that was probably why the bread was late today. No one questioned it. It made sense. It didn't have to be true. It was enough to explain the stillness. Someone farther up muttered, "God bless the child," and someone else nodded slowly, like the story had always been there, waiting to be said aloud. I didn't know if there was a baker's daughter or a baby or a delay, but suddenly I felt like I did. The bread wasn't just flour and water anymore. It was part of something living, something tangled in family and timing and the weather. And we kept waiting. A breeze picked up again, this time strong enough to rattle a shutter loose from its hook. It clapped once against the stone wall before a man leaned out of a nearby window and fastened it with practiced ease. He didn't look down at us, just did what needed doing, then disappeared again into the quiet dimness behind the glass. Somewhere, a baby cried. Not close. Faint from one of the rooms above. The kind of cry that comes from hunger or boredom or maybe just from being very small in a very big world. It rose and fell like a distant seagull and then faded away. I wondered, idly, how far I was from the bakery now, but I didn't turn my head. The line had become something more than a means to an end. It had become the moment itself, an odd sort of meditation, a soft surrender. Across the way, a man in a tall hat was painting. He had an easel set up on a crooked bit of sidewalk and a palette perched in one hand. I could just make out the edge of his canvas. It looked like he was painting the sky or something like it, but not the way it was. the way it could be. He dabbed at it absently, not looking at what he was doing, his eyes drifting toward the people in the line. I half expected him to come over and ask to paint one of us. But he didn't. He just stood there, adding clouds to a sky that didn't have any. Time passed in those small ways you don't notice until they've stacked up. The violinist sat down. The girl with the stick stopped drawing. The couple with the memory of the dog held hands now. Nothing had really changed, and yet everything had. I shifted my weight again, trying not to favor one foot over the other for too long. The stones underfoot had begun to press themselves into the memory of my shoes. A pigeon cooed very close to me, and I looked down to see it standing right next to my boot. It blinked slowly at me, then walked a small circle and settled in as though I were part of the landscape. I suppose I was. The woman in the bonnet hummed again. A different tune this time. I didn't recognize it, but it felt familiar anyway, like something I might have heard once while falling asleep in the back of a carriage or drifting off near a fire. I looked up again. The laundry had stopped moving. The air had stilled. For just a breath, everything held. And then, slowly, we shuffled forward. No one said anything. No one celebrated. It wasn't a great leap, just a small collective exhale as feet found new stones to stand on. I took a step, then another, and still, we waited. I found myself thinking about the bread again, what kind it might be, whether it would have a hard crust or be soft in the middle, whether it would still be warm by the time I got to it, whether there would be any left at all. It didn't really matter, of course. The bread was almost beside the point now. We weren't just standing in line for food anymore. We were standing in line to be part of something. A moment, a rhythm, a silence that had a shape. I wondered if the baker, wherever they were, knew what they were creating, not just loaves, but this strange shared lull in time. A city held still by the idea of nourishment. I looked around again, slowly. A woman near the front had started to braid the ends of her scarf, twisting the worn threads into careful knots. Beside her, a man leaned forward with his hands clasped behind his back, the way some people do when they're pretending not to be tired. There were children now, a few more than before, some sitting, some skipping small stones across the seams of the pavement, inventing quiet games only they understood. A crow landed on a street lamp nearby. It tilted its head at the line, let out a single caw, then seemed to lose interest in us and flew off again, its wings making no more noise than a page turning in a heavy book. There was something magical about how little happened here, about how no one seemed to need anything more than this. No stories were being told aloud, and yet I felt like I was surrounded by them, living stories. Worn shoes and patched coats and hands that had known flour and wool and ink. Every glance was a poem, every shrug a paragraph. A little boy with mismatched buttons stopped next to me and offered me a piece of something. Bread, maybe, or dried apple. I shook my head gently, and he smiled like I'd just told him the ending of a very long joke. Then he wandered back to wherever he'd come from, humming. Behind me, the man with the mustache whispered something I didn't quite catch. It sounded like, "They say the king's in trouble." But it wasn't urgent. It was the kind of rumor spoken the same way you might comment on the weather. Distant thunder on a far horizon. Not here, not now. The violinist shifted on his crate and began playing again very quietly. A few bars, a pause. Another few, like he was letting the music come to him in pieces. A woman nearby hummed in harmony. A baby laughed, just once, then nothing, and again. We waited. I leaned against a building for a while. The stone was cool and rough, and I liked the way it pressed back against me. It reminded me of waiting for trains in some other year, or sitting on a seawall, watching the tide not come in. There's a kind of peace in uselessness, in simply being somewhere for no reason other than you are. I closed my eyes. I might have even dozed a little, standing right there in line. Just for a second, the kind of sleep where the world gets a little warmer and your knees forget they have a job to do. I dreamed about nothing at all, which is the best kind of dream. A soft color, a floating thought. When I opened my eyes again, the line had moved maybe 2 steps. No one had noticed I'd drifted off. Or maybe they had, and no one minded. The bakery must have been close now. I could smell something richer on the air, yeast and crust and a touch of soot from the oven, but still no building in sight. Just the suggestion of one, and we didn't rush toward it. That would have ruined the mood. Instead, we all just shifted, gently, again. The clouds had completely gone now. The sky had that dry, quiet blue that feels like a held breath. Sunlight pooled lazily at the edges of things. Shadows leaned comfortably. An old woman a few spots up pulled out a knitting project. She began stitching without looking, her needles clacking softly in a rhythm that felt ancient. I watched the yarn slip through her fingers like it was born there. She didn't seem to be making anything in particular, just knitting to keep her hands from forgetting. I liked her. There was a clock tower somewhere in the distance that struck the hour, though I couldn't have told you which one. The chime echoed lightly across the rooftops, almost reluctant, like it hated to disturb anyone. It was the kind of sound that let you know time was passing, but also that you didn't need to do anything about it. A dog barked once, but even that seemed half-hearted. The knitting woman had made a small square of something by now. She held it up to the light, considered it, and smiled as if it had told her a secret. Then she folded it and tucked it neatly into her coat pocket like a letter she might send later. I shifted forward another few inches, though I wasn't paying attention to the line anymore. I'd become part of it. Less a person, more a piece of the scenery. I found myself wondering how long some of these people had been doing this. Not just today, but across many mornings. Was this part of their ritual? The bread line as a kind of morning prayer. The couple ahead of me had now sat down on a low stoop beside the wall. He offered her his coat. She accepted it. Then they leaned shoulder to shoulder, eyes half-lidded. They weren't asleep, but they weren't quite awake either. Somewhere in between, like a candle flickering in the late afternoon. The violinist had stopped again. His bow rested on his lap. He looked like he might fall asleep upright. I half hoped he would. He deserved that sort of peace. Across the street, a man was painting a door. He moved with careful strokes, the kind of care that only comes from either love or boredom. Maybe both. He'd painted half of it in a deep forest green. The contrast against the stone was beautiful. He stepped back to look at it, brush still in hand, and nodded slightly. Just once, before continuing. Someone passed out cups of something warm a few places ahead. I couldn't see who started it, but it made its way down the line like a whisper. Little ceramic mugs, mismatched and chipped, but full of steam and kindness. I accepted one when it reached me. The liquid inside tasted faintly of herbs and lemon peel. Maybe there was a hint of honey, maybe not. Either way, it warmed my chest in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. The woman in front of me glanced back and gave a soft smile. We didn't speak. We just sipped. More pigeons now. 3 of them marched in confident formation past the line, their little heads bobbing as if they had somewhere extremely important to be. No one paid them much mind, but I found them strangely comforting. A breeze stirred the dust again, not enough to lift anything, just enough to make you aware of the space around your ankles. The boy who had offered me food earlier returned. This time he had a small wooden top, which he spun expertly right in the middle of the street. It wobbled and danced in uneven circles, refusing to fall for far longer than seemed reasonable. A few people clapped politely when it finally toppled. He bowed dramatically and then disappeared into the crowd like a magician. We moved again. A few more steps. The air was thicker now with the smell of bread. crusty, golden, earthy. It made the back of my throat ache in the best way, but still, no one rushed. There was no need to. A man with a wide straw hat passed by holding a handful of daisies, which he offered to each person in line with a shy nod. Not everyone accepted. Some were too surprised, but those who did took them gently, as though they might crumble under their touch. I took one too, held it loosely in my fingers. It didn't smell like much, but it looked like a promise. I tucked it into my coat. The woman in front of me turned her head slightly and said, "Almost there." She said it not with hope or excitement, but with a kind of reverence, like she wasn't talking about bread at all. I nodded, though I still couldn't see the bakery. Maybe it didn't matter. I began to wonder if the line ever really ended. Not in a skeptical way, more like wondering if rivers ever stop being rivers or if they just become something else. Maybe, I thought, the front of the line was more of a feeling than a place, the kind of thing that happens to you quietly, like falling asleep mid-thought or drifting into a dream where the world looks familiar, but you're not quite sure why. The sounds of the street had changed too, not louder, just rounder, fuller. The clink of wooden crates, the faint rustle of aprons, the whir of someone sweeping behind a doorway. I could hear the steady sound of something being kneaded, flesh on dough, rhythm on rhythm. A soft thump repeated endlessly. It was close now, not visible yet, but close in the way a memory gets close before it becomes real again. A man with a bundle of kindling passed by, his arms full and his face relaxed. He nodded at the line as if he saw it every day, like one might nod at an old tree that's always been in the same spot. The couple beside me stood again. He brushed dust from the back of her skirt, and she adjusted his collar. Not for vanity, just to make things neat, to make things right. They looked ahead and smiled, as though they could see something I couldn't. I looked down at the cobblestones. They seemed to shine now, polished by footsteps and patience. I could almost hear them whispering, not in words, just in memory. They'd seen all of this before. A man near the front coughed, not harshly, just enough to clear a thought. Someone handed him a handkerchief, and he used it delicately, then folded it with a kind of dignity you don't often see in the middle of a public street. I let my eyes wander again. To the windows, where curtains fluttered like slow wings. To the chimneys, where smoke spiraled upward in tired little ribbons. To the iron railings, cold and unmoving, but somehow still full of stories. And then, without ceremony, without any fanfare at all, I saw it. The bakery. It was small, nearly hidden by a crooked beam and a half-painted sign that had likely been weathered beyond legibility. A simple wooden door with scuffs along the bottom from years of feet and baskets and pushing. A woman stood behind the counter inside, visible through the narrow window. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and her sleeves were dusted in flour. She was speaking softly to someone, maybe giving them a loaf, maybe asking about their child. No hurry, no stress, just the same even rhythm the whole line had been keeping. And still, we waited. No one surged forward. No one grew restless. The line moved one person at a time with the patience of wind through tall grass. Slow, deliberate, gentle. The woman in front of me took a step, then another. My heart didn't race. I didn't lean forward or crane my neck. I just followed, quietly, as the space between me and the doorway shortened. A man exited the bakery, holding a wrapped bundle. Steam curled from the cloth, and his face held a kind of wonder, like he'd been given more than he expected. He didn't look around for applause. Just tucked the loaf beneath his arm and walked on. 2 people entered, then 1. Then it was my turn. The bell above the door didn't ring, or maybe it did, but the sound was so soft it slipped right past my ears. The warmth inside was immediate. Not hot, just welcoming. The kind of warmth that smells like crust and hearth and the passage of time. The woman behind the counter looked at me, and for a moment I wondered if she saw me the way I was, or the way I was pretending to be. She didn't question it, just gave a slow nod and reached beneath the counter. She placed the loaf in front of me without a word. I placed a few coins on the wood. I wasn't sure if they were the right coins or even the right year, but she didn't blink. Just slid them into a small drawer and looked past me to the next person in line. I took the loaf. It was heavier than I expected, dense but soft. The crust crackled faintly when I touched it, like it had secrets. I stepped outside and let the door close gently behind me. And that was it. The line went on. Not shorter, not longer, just continuing. People still standing, still breathing, still waiting. I didn't eat the bread. Not yet. I held it like a treasure. Or maybe like a memory. Something I would carry with me into whatever came next. I walked slowly down the street, away from the line, away from the bakery. The cobblestones felt the same beneath my feet. The pigeons hadn't gone anywhere. The violinist was gone, but a piece of his melody lingered in the back of my mind. I reached into my pocket and touched the stone. It was warm. I didn't press it. Not yet. I wasn't in a hurry. I'd been in Paris. I'd waited in a very long line for bread. Somehow, that felt like enough.